Hello, this is Matt Ballant, author of The Valley of the Pharaohs, episode 5. Now we're going to get into the meat of the game and the main attributes. There are 5 primary attributes in Valley of the Pharaohs: strength, quickness, intellect, power, and persona. In the original game, quickness was called speed, but I've broken that out into a separate, what I'm calling a secondary attribute, and which is one that's not directly rolled. So I renamed it as quickness because that's really what it represented, even in the original game. So strength is your standard physical strength. Quickness is your nimbleness, dexterity, if you will. Intellect is a combination of your intelligence, capacity to learn, as in mental power. Power is a combination of mental toughness as well as endurance, perseverance, those qualities of a person's personality. And persona, which is a combination again of the physical and the mental, in that high persona characters are perceived as charismatic and can influence the decision of others. As in many other games, these attributes are initially determined by rolling 6-sided dice, and the race the character is determines how many dice that you roll in order to determine what the attributes are. And there's a chart from the book. Humans have standard 3 6-sided dice for each of the 5 attributes, and the other races, some have 4, some have 2. So that gives you an idea of what each race is better at or worse at, if you will. If you're rolling 2 dice, you always get a +1 on that, because 3 is the minimum attribute that you could have. Not that I would recommend you play a character that has an attribute that low, but some people like that. They like a challenge, so it is there on the charts. For purposes of this game, it's really important that you have at least one attribute that's a 15 or better. And those are considered exceptional. After all, you're playing exceptional characters. You're not playing, say, a run-of-the-mill farmer or a run-of-the-mill bureaucrat who works as a clerk in some office somewhere. You can play that if you want, but that's not really what the game is designed to represent. The characters are supposed to be exceptional in some fashion. So 15 or better, at least one attribute. However, if you do manage to roll a 16 or higher on the dice rolls, you are able to add an additional 6-sided die. So what I do in the games that I run, and when we're generating characters, is you always roll 1 additional die. So if you're a human, you're rolling 4 6-sided dice, and you're taking the top 3 of those 6-sided dice. So now if those 3 dice happen to equal 16 or higher, then you take that additional 4th die as your attribute. And the same goes if you were rolling a 4d6 attribute, you would actually roll 5 dice, and the same rule applies. If you roll 16 or higher on the 4 dice, then you just add that 5th die into the attribute. Now, the one somewhat exception to this rule for adding an additional die is those characters who have attributes where you roll 2 dice, in which case the rule that I apply is if you roll a 12, you roll a 12 or better, then you get a 3rd die. So that gives you a range anywhere up to a maximum of 30 is the maximum attribute number. And also remember from the previous videos, depending on your social cast, you get a +1 to one of your attributes. So commoners, for example, they get a +1 in strength. So if a character rolled a 13 strength on the dice, then they would get an additional 1 point added to that. So they'd actually start the game with a 14 strength. Now, attributes give bonuses. And this is again, from the game, the chart, the attribute bonus chart. As you can see, strength adds to damage generally, and this is handheld or missile weapon damage. This does not apply to any kind of magical damage that's done. It has to be a handheld or some sort of hand-propelled missile weapon like a bow or a sling. Quickness affects your to-hit, parry, or dodge rolls, as well as can give an initiative bonus. Intellect adds a certain number, can add a certain percentage to your starting skills. And this would generally be when you are choosing your skills at the beginning of a character. You would gain, for example, if you had an intelligence of 16, you would gain +2% on all of your skill determination. So, for example, if a skill might normally start at 15%, if you had a high intellect, you would add 2 to that. So you would have 17% as a starting skill level. Power affects the casting of spells. In general, when you cast a spell, you have a difficulty level that you must roll under. So higher your power is, you get a little bit of a bonus onto that roll. So if, for example, you had a spell with a difficulty level of 70, meaning normally you'd have to roll 70 or less on percentile dice. If again you had, let's just use 16 as an example. If you had a power of 16, that gives you a +1. So what that means is you could actually roll up to 71 and still be successful. So you can think of it as either increasing the difficulty percentage or reducing the roll, however you want to apply it in the game that you play. Persona gives the ability to impress. Everyone has that innate skill, I guess, if you want to call it a skill, but just the ability to impress others through their speech and through their physical appearance and personality, charisma, those types of things. This number that's on the chart is a percentage of success, and it should be considered as a base, because in certain situations you might get just a situational bonus. You might normally have a 10% chance of impressing someone, but again, if you had a 16 persona, you might get a 25% bonus on that. So instead of it being 10%, it'd be 35%. Again, it's up to the game master to apply these types of things. There's no hard and fast rule on this. It's just a general guideline. And now, attributes also are used for what are called attribute checks, or Another term for them is savings throw. And generally, an attribute check is 5 times the attribute as a percentage. So if you had a 12 attribute, that would give you a 60% chance of successfully passing an attribute check. And in the game, there's an example of the primary adverse situations that a game master might call for an attribute check. Exposure to poison, possibly being stunned in combat, or being in a very fearful or distracting situation. Now, most attribute checks are based on a single attribute, intelligence or power, strength, that sort of thing. But there are a few that are multiple attributes based. And just as an example, again, the stunning blow, you would add the strength and the power of the character together and divide them by half. So basically, you're taking an average of those two attributes. And in this system, you always round fractions down. So if you had a 12 strength and a 13 power, that would be 25. Half of 25 is 12. And then you would multiply that 12 by 5 to get your percentage chance, which again would be 60. Now, the next thing after your primary attributes, it would be your physical characteristics. These are generally height and mass of the character. You're affected by the race as well as your sex. And then your starting age. Now, within the game, age really isn't used in many situations, although, again, it's up to the game master. They might come up with a situation where age would be appropriate. But in general, you're in your early to mid 20s, considered to be in that age range. Now, getting back to the height and mass, each of the different races has a number of dice that they roll with the starting base height and base mass, again, depending on the sex of the character. And depending on the results of that roll, you can have an adjustment to the base, either a reduction in height and a corresponding reduction in mass, or an addition to height and an increase in mass. And players on the extreme receive additional what are called renowned points. And renowned, I'll get into later, that's another secondary attribute. It has to do with how well the party and characters within the party are known in the general community and within the world. So again, these numbers are adjustments to the base, which was given in the previous slide, again, based on the race of the character and the sex of the character. So in the next video, we'll be getting into all of the secondary attributes, and after that into the choice of occupations and the skills within the system. So we're starting to get into the meat of the character generation process. As stated in previous videos, you can buy copies of the game at concodesigns.com, and anyone who buys a copy also gets a free PDF copy, so they can use that to print out charts and character sheets and that sort of thing. Talk to you later. Thank you.